Welcome everyone to Current in 30, the 30-minute webinar series brought to you by the Current Consulting Group. We are thrilled to have you with us. To briefly introduce this series, each session is designed to keep you informed, efficient, and ahead of the curve. On the second and fourth Mondays of each month throughout 2026, we'll break down key things you need to know about workplace drug screening, from emerging trends and regulatory updates to best practices and practical implementation tips. If you missed our previous sessions, please visit our website, currentconsultinggroup.com, or our YouTube channel at Current Consulting Group to view those sessions. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Greta Walsh of the Current Consulting Group, and today's Current in 30 presentation is titled, The Importance of Keeping Your Drug Testing Policy Current. This presentation qualifies for half of a professional development credit from SHRM and HRCI for those who attend today's presentation in its entirety. Today's presentation welcomes a Senior Vice President of the Current Consulting Group, Brian Feely. Brian has more than 40 years of experience in the medical diagnostics industry. He is named as an inventor on 4 patents in the diagnostics field, is an author of numerous publications, and speaks frequently at industry meetings and workshops. He is considered an expert in the science, sales, and marketing of drug and alcohol testing products with a particular focus on the merits of oral fluid drug testing. Brian is also well-versed in compliance services, such as drug testing policy, training for supervisors and employees, and state and federal law issues. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to our presenter, Brian Feely from the Current Consulting Group.
Well, thank you, Greta. I appreciate that. And thanks everyone for attending today's webinar. This is kind of an exciting 30 minutes for me, I think, in the sense that we often talk about the importance of policy in bits and pieces, but in this particular quick 30-minute webinar, we're going to really focus on the top reasons, and really 10 of them will hit you, with this presentation pretty hard. And I think hopefully from that, it should be pretty convincing for folks that have a policy and that haven't updated it recently, why they should, and for those providers who might be on this webinar, why you should be talking to your clients about updating their policy, keeping it up to date, and really being a check and balance for those clients as well. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the key components of the policy first, the top 10 reasons why you should keep it updated, and then a little bit about how and why one size doesn't necessarily fit all anymore when it comes to a drug testing policy. So let's start with just kind of these key components of a policy, and the number of things that are part of a policy today have expanded over time. You've always had a purpose and statement and who's covered under that, and who the policy applies to, and obviously the conduct, prohibited conduct. But some of the things that are sometimes not in there relate to the list of what might be safety sensitive positions today, because people sometimes want to define what those positions are and what they aren't, because they can be excluded from a policy if they're not particularly safety sensitive. A marijuana section, hasn't always been the case in the past, but now you really do need to have one. The availability of treatment options, looking at intervention and the idea of voluntary and non-voluntary laws, and part of that help and intervention. State amendments, which may not necessarily have been a thing many years ago. There was a tendency for people to do one policy fits all template kind of thing. Now that's really not easily done and shouldn't be done, really. You need to have a policy that covers the home base, but then also every state that you do business in, or at least most of them, need to really have an amendment associated with them. And then things like procedures and forms being identified in that policy are also important. So we did a survey in 2025, and it was of employers, and we asked them, when did you last update your policy? And 42% indicated that had been more than a year, and another 6% saying they've never really updated the policy. So those are pretty big numbers for when you think about the number of state laws, and I think we'll have a slide coming up on things that get initiated and passed and considered in legislative processes. It's significant. And so for almost 50% here to have indicated that it's been more than a year or that have not updated their policy at all is a little scary. What are the biggest challenges to performing drug testing? When asked that question, 20% said it's really keeping that policy up to date. And as we'll talk about, that's something that we can help with. So it doesn't have to all be on you. We're here to help, and we have lots of expertise in doing so. So some of the policy recommendations and why an up-to-date policy really is the foundation of an effective workplace program. It's kind of like a recipe to success of your drug-free workplace program. Without a policy, you have no directions and no recipe. Outdated policies can lead to compliance issues and certainly ineffective programs and even legal challenges, which we have seen that happen. Unfortunately, sometimes we get a call and it's someone that lapsed and didn't update their policy, and they need to do it quickly because of a challenge that has occurred from something being out of date. They should be reviewed annually. Really, that's your best way to do that, and we help with those reviews. And when we can update and look at something on an annual basis, it becomes very inexpensive and not an issue. It's when things get 5-10 years outdated, you almost have to just scrap that policy and start and write a new one. There's lots of changing landscape, especially with regard to marijuana laws, really they should be updated promptly as these new state laws and federal regulations are enacted. That way you're not letting it lapse and find out one day that you didn't update something that really should have been updated for a state law or a federal regulation. So let's get into these top reasons. We're going to give you 10 of them today. So the first one, increasing drug abuse. So some reports claim that substance abuse has leveled off, and if you look at certain data, you might conclude that. There are certain data points out there like the Quest Diagnostics Index. If you look at that for urine testing, for example, you might think it's leveled off at 4 or 5%. But really, if you could be fooled by just looking at that, because if you look at things like oral fluid and hair testing and you combine those in a program to effectively cover the different types of drugs of abuse out there, you really can find some pretty significant rates. The Quest Diagnostics Index just came out and reported that 1 in 5 American workers that had tested, and it's amongst the large group of population. The hair testing positive rate was 19.1%. So that's in the general workforce. That's a big number. Oral fluid was over 11% positive rate. So if you're looking at a 4.5% urine positive rate, thinking your rate is in that window, that there's probably some things that you're missing. Number 2, new drugs of abuse coming out. You hear a lot today about marijuana and fentanyl, rightfully so, but there are some other fairly scary emerging drugs that are coming out. They're not always included in your panel, and these are important things to talk to your provider about or to your lab about, because they're beginning to test for some of these things that are coming out there. I just noticed today, in fact, that the DEA has released a news release today that they're temporarily going to move a substance called 7-OH. It's part of the kratom plant, and some folks are out there making this synthetically and concentrating it. The DEA is going to add that to the list as a Schedule 1 drug because of the health consequences to society and in our workplaces. So there's a source here. You can check that out. Pretty good way to keep check on this National Drug Early Warning System website. But new drugs coming out is also a reason you got to add those to your policy and make sure when you do include them that they're part of that policy. Drug use on the way to work. So this is a scary one. There are a couple of different reports out there that have been generated recently, interviewing people that are either cannabis users or marijuana users or illicit drug users. In a survey of 500 people who admitted to being marijuana users, 31 confessed that they used marijuana during their commute to the workplace. That's scary. 77% say they use marijuana at home before leaving for work. So, those numbers of people ultimately mean that those people are ending up in your workplace, and while they did it on their own time, they're on your time now once they arrive at work. And if they're stoned, then that's not good. That's as good as coming to work drunk. In another survey of 1,000 admitted illicit drug users, 28% admit to getting high on their way to work. A separate study. Number 4, drug use while on the job gets scarier. So in this survey of the 500 marijuana using employees cited previously, 48% admit to using pot at work, either during breaks or while actively working. And then in that other survey of 1,000, 28% admit to getting high while on their lunch break, 11% in the afternoon. I think you get the point. Drug abuse on the job is on the rise. And so you need to make sure that that's being included in your policy, that they're not allowed to be at work impaired or using marijuana, bringing marijuana or substances into the workplace. All those things can be spelled out and updated in a policy. Post-accident positivity trends are on the way up. When you look at this data, this is from the Quest Diagnostics Index. They looked at post-accident testing and a number of other things, pre-employment and some other things are in that index. But in particular, this data shows that between 2018 or 2016 and 2024, post-accident positive rates went from under 4% to over 7%. So that's a significant increase in what we're seeing in terms of post-accident tests that are coming from positive marijuana results. Number 6, changing state laws. Last year, there were nearly 600 bills that were considered at the state level. And if, all those were enacted, they all weren't. But if they were, they would have a direct impact on workplace drug testing. And we're following those. Some of them have been enacted. We do a release every couple of months, a legislative update called Leg Up. And in there, we show the bills that have been updated and those that have failed and those that have passed and those that are in the process of being passed. And several new laws actually were passed in addition to the existing ones that were amended. And all of these, when they come into play in a state that you operate in, should require you really to update your policy. Number 7, marijuana legislation. Most states have already legalized marijuana when you look at it for both medical and recreational use. If you haven't updated that in your policy, that needs to be updated. And we're seeing a lot of amendments and other things being proposed at this point related to employee use. And there are more restrictions now on employers in terms of what they can do with testing for marijuana. And that needs to be spelled out in that policy. Number 8, new testing methods. At the top of the list, of course, emerging test methods. One of them has been oral fluid, but there are others coming into play. And when you introduce a new method, whether it's oral fluid or you might be looking at some of these impairment screens, fitness for duty screens that you're using as part of your program, they should be mentioned in your policy. And so before you implement those things, policy should be looked at, figure out where that mention should go in the policy and make sure that that's spelled out so that supervisors and employees know, what are the changes that are being made to the policy and who is that subject to. Number 9, DOT and oral fluid testing. So in May of 2023, the DOT issued its final rule for lab-based oral fluid testing. While we're waiting for 2 labs to be certified to be able to do that. That's coming. So oral fluid, and once that begins to get initiated and implemented, those DOT policies, and even those who use the DOT policy for their non-DOT program, that needs to be spelled out in there. And just as a statistic, the federal government predicted in 2019 that as much as 30% of the DOT regulated employers will switch or will add oral fluid testing to their overall programs. And so that has a direct impact on policies, and in this case, the regulated policies, the DOT policies. Number 10, changing company priorities. This happens. Companies that conduct drug testing and how they do it and where they do it, sometimes that can change and priorities shift. And so when a company has maybe have a change in management, a change in philosophy, a change in states, they begin doing business in states they weren't doing it in before. All those things have an impact on pulling out that policy and taking a look at it. All right, so just a comment or two about why one size fits all drug testing policies really are no longer sufficient. Despite the importance of the policy, it sometimes gets treated as an afterthought. And this is particularly true in the case where, they might have gotten a policy that was really no charge to them, and it was a template policy, and they don't really pay as much attention to it as they probably should. It's just like any of us. Sometimes we'll get something for free, and you take it for granted, and you might not kick the tires as much on it or appreciate it as much. But with policy, you really need to dig into it these days and make sure that it's not a template that is one policy trying to fit all of your states and all of the things that you do as part of your company. It really needs to be well thought out and make sure it's following those state and federal regulations. And so it has addendums, as I mentioned before. State laws are different across state lines. You can do things in one state that you can't do in another, particularly as it relates to marijuana. So really that policy needs to be a more inclusive policy than it ever was. And so, those types of policies tend to be out of date within months, if not already from the time that you get them. Employers are likely to pay little attention to them. Employers are likely to pay little or no attention to it because hasn't really been customized to their specific circumstance. And I was just on a call today where I think that might have been the case with a company that we were talking to. Doesn't take into consideration the applicable state laws and regulations. If it's a DOT policy, it may not have been updated for some changes that have occurred to the 49 CFR Part 40 rules, some things related to the clearinghouse and other things that have been added to regulated policies. It probably doesn't cover state workers' compensation if it was a template type thing. That can often contain drug testing language, requirements for employers particularly if you want to move to deny workers' comp claims and someone tests positive in the case of an accident. They provide employers with little or no legal defensibility when someone uses, like, for example, this respondent superior or negligent hiring claim. These are things that protect employers. And if you should have or could have known about an employee's substance abuse or you had reasonable suspicion, but it wasn't acted upon, and an employee causes an event, an accident or incident to occur and someone gets injured, you as an employer could be held responsible for that because you didn't test for something or you didn't have a policy update in place that protected that or that covered that situation. And so those are just some legal things that you have to pay attention to. So we're here to help. I think the key is to make sure that you're reviewing that on an annual basis. If you haven't reviewed it in a long time, we're here to help. We have a state law database that we use and that you can also subscribe to, by the way, but it's a very, very up-to-date state law database on all the drug and alcohol testing laws. Marijuana is covered, medical marijuana, legal marijuana, all different statutes related to drug testing, what you can do, what specimens you can do, what you can't do, et cetera, et cetera. So we use that to do our policy development work and updates for our clients. We have online training courses that can help also if you're not doing supervisor training frequently enough or you want an outside source to help with that. We do online, virtual, and in-person training. we have a lot of expertise with drug and alcohol testing products, so we can be used from a consultant standpoint of kicking the tires a little bit on these new methods, what's working, what's not working out there, what looks good, selecting oral fluid products, for example. And then we also generate legal and regulatory reports for clients, and this leg up that I had mentioned before, legislative updates. So if you need help reviewing or updating your drug testing policy, if the reasons we just covered, something resonated there with you, reach out to us. There's our website. We have a phone number you can call and leave us a message. We're very prompt about getting back to folks that inquire with us. And we really appreciate your time today and hope that was helpful.
Brian, we actually have a few questions and we have some time. So the first question we have, well, it's a comment followed by a question. Our company hasn't updated its drug testing policy in several years. What's the first thing you recommend we review to make sure we're still compliant?
So I guess the answer to that is all the sections in your policy that relate to covered employees, consequences. Have you spelled out the positions that are part of that program? How have you handled marijuana? And do you have state addendums? So if the answer to any of those things is, we haven't really spelled out the types of positions or consequences, or we started to do business in new states and we haven't included them in the policy, or we really don't have state addendums at all. We don't have a marijuana section, and I think that those would be a few key things to look at. And I think also every once in a while you've got to look at it from the company culture standpoint too. What are you looking to achieve as part of this policy? The drug testing methods, I think, are really important. Are we really using methods that cover the reasons that we're testing? If you're doing, for example, urine and hair testing, or you're just doing urine testing and you have situations with reasonable suspicion, or post-accident testing and you're doing urine, really there's a better way to do it. I mean, oral fluid is a better indicator of recent use, tells you what's in their system, right there on the spot. You have some sort of suspicion that someone smells or, has somebody's been seen smoking marijuana or doing a substance. Again, oral fluid is going to tell you what's in their system right there and then. So those kinds of things as well, Greta, just looking at your drug testing methodology, is it up to date for what you're trying to achieve as part of your program?
Thanks, Brian. We have time for one more. We're thinking of switching to oral fluid testing. What policy changes should we make before implementing it?
Well, so the first part is identifying which testing methodology you're going to use. Is it a rapid instant test? Is it lab-based, or maybe it's both? So you want to clearly identify the product, and you want to make sure that you've got your supervisors trained and everyone involved knowing what that test is and how it works and how the program's going to work. Of course, your DER is key in that. They have to be in the loop and be in the know of everything related to that. You have to make sure, if it is an instant test, that it's compliant with the states in which you do business. Some states don't allow for a point of collection or an instant test. In some states, it has to be FDA cleared. Those are all things that we also help with, or you can find them on our state law database. But so I would say making sure you've got the product identified, spelled out, you've got all the facts and where you're going to use it, who you're going to use it on, which oral fluid test it is. We sometimes hear people wanting to include cutoffs of the test in their policy. While that's typically done with regulated testing, because those are regulated cutoffs and everybody sort of knows what they are. You don't necessarily have to include cutoffs in your policy for oral fluid. You can keep that a little bit flexible, again, unless it's mandated testing. At the point that's implemented, that's part of the federal program and dictated. But identifying those things and then getting them in the policy so that it's clear what you're using when on which employees and how it's going to work.
Thanks, Brian. And one more. How often should we review and update our drug testing policies to keep up with changing state laws and regulations?
Well, so I think I mentioned this during the webinar. The ideal scenario is looking at it every year. And so, just put it on your calendar and pull it out, and it'll make you think about it and make you reflect on what took place during that last year. You can bounce it off of us and we can take a quick look at it for you. And if you keep up on it every year, the likeliness that there could be certain years that you're not going to need to do anything. And then one year something may have changed in where you do business, or a particular marijuana law has changed, in which case it's going to be much easier and much less expensive to sort of do an update that way than finding out 3 or 4 years down the road that you haven't updated, and then it's really a full it's almost like doing a new policy depending upon where you do business.
Thank you, Brian. And thank you to everyone joining us for today's edition of Current in 30. We hope these insights help you stay informed and confident in your workplace drug screening decisions. As a reminder, this presentation was recorded and you will receive instructions in a few days informing you how to access the recording. Additionally, this presentation does qualify for half of a professional development credit from SHRM and HRCI for those who attend today's presentation in its entirety. If you have met that requirement, you will be emailed the activity IDs. And remember, we'll be back every second and fourth Monday of 2026 with new things you need to know. To stay current, follow us at Current Consulting Group and check your inbox for upcoming session details. Until next time, stay current and have a great day.